The whole world calls you Mbappe, but only he calls you Kylian. And that one sentence you said, Neymar is a tramp, turned brothers who were once inseparable into strangers who unfollowed each other overnight. It turns out that in front of the throne and power, even the most sincere friendship can be shattered by a single sentence.
I know.
The story goes back to 2017. Paris Saint-Germain welcomed a dream duo, Neymar and Mbappe. One was a samba genius, the other a French supercar. Back then, they were considered by many to be the perfect example of brotherhood. On the pitch, Neymar was willing to play the supporting role, even giving penalty kicks to Mbappe. After scoring, the two would celebrate with a hug. Off the pitch, they went on vacations together, played video games together, and never missed private gatherings. At the beginning of their relationship, both of them were completely sincere. One was willing to guide, the other was willing to follow. You've probably experienced that feeling too. Staying up late talking with friends, doing all kinds of silly things together, and believing that, as long as the friendship is real, nothing in this world could ever tear you apart. But the cruelest thing about friendship is exactly this. It never stays forever at the moment when you first met. People change, and the 2018 World Cup became a huge turning point. At just 19 years old, Mbappe won the World Cup and became an overnight legend. He became France's national darling, a leading candidate for the future best player in the world. Meanwhile, Neymar once again fell short along the way. The mocking labels of diver and glass man spread everywhere. When the two returned to Paris, the atmosphere between them had quietly changed. Mbappe used to be the younger brother who looked up to Neymar. But after lifting the World Cup and becoming the hope of an entire nation, he inevitably began to rise higher. At that moment, he was no longer satisfied with being the talented sidekick. What he wanted was an era that truly belonged to him. And the outside world began constantly asking one question: who was the real king of Paris? When the spotlight of the club and the media began to shine entirely on Mbappe, Neymar slowly went from the absolute core to just an important member of the team. And the conflict between them first truly exploded in public during the famous penalty incident. According to the team's default rule, the penalty taker had always been Neymar. It was also a symbol of status and trust. But that time, when Paris won another penalty, Mbappe walked straight up and asked to take it. This wasn't just a simple, let me take this one. It was more like a clear declaration. I have the right to be the man here too. At that moment, all the cameras were focused on these two friends who were once inseparable. In the end, Neymar still took the penalty. He scored, but almost no one cared about the score anymore. The whole world was discussing one question: who really runs the locker room in Paris? And what truly pushed this relationship toward a complete breakdown was Mbappe's contract extension. To keep him, the club offered an extremely generous deal, even including a certain level of influence in team decisions. From that moment on, he was no longer just Neymar's younger brother. He became someone with almost half the authority of a boss, the so-called Director Mbappe. The team's tactics gradually began to revolve more around him. Priority for penalties and set pieces started to lean in his direction. The media narrative also began to shift. Paris would rebuild the team around Mbappe. But what hurt Neymar the most were the rumors that later spread. It was said that Mbappe had told the club's management that Neymar suffered too many injuries, that his form was unstable, and that he was not suitable to be the future core of the team. He even hinted that the club should consider moving Neymar on. From Neymar's point of view, I was the one who gave you this stage. And now that you have influence, the first thing you want to do is push me out of this team. Even though at that time the two of them hadn't completely fallen out in public, that brotherhood had already begun to crack deep inside, and everything that happened afterwards seemed to become almost inevitable. Neymar was caught in the storm of public opinion while slowly being pushed to the margins by the club's management, and the massive offer from Saudi Arabia became an option he could no longer ignore. Then came the harsh words: Neymar is a wanderer. Many people only remember that sentence, but what truly destroyed their relationship was never just one comment. It was the result of countless choices made before. Neymar's pride refused to bow down, Mbappe's ambition and sense of reality, and a club that kept creating competition, constantly putting the question of who is the real number one on the table. That sentence was simply the final straw that broke an already fragile friendship. The real tragedy between Neymar and Mbappe is this: Neymar couldn't accept that he was no longer the main character, and Mbappe couldn't tolerate living forever in someone else's shadow. Both of them were desperate to prove one thing: I am the most important one. Under circumstances like this, so-called brothers or friends often become just a brief moment of warmth in a long journey of life. They can't withstand the calculations of reality, and they rarely survive time and difficult choices. If this story touched you, it might be because you saw a reflection of your own life in them. That childhood friend you once grew up with, that roommate you used to spend every day with in college, that person who once told you, if you ever need anything, just call me. And now you hesitate for a long time before even sending them a message. So maybe the real question isn't who was right or wrong. It's whether, when circumstances change, when status shifts, and when interests collide, we are still willing to give a little, slow down a little, and soften a little for the sake of a friendship. Because friendships don't break simply because they are weak. They break when they are no longer cherished, no longer protected, no longer kept in a place in our hearts that isn't ruled by calculation. So do you think Neymar and Mbappe could ever truly reconcile?